St Peter's Hospital has been part of the community for over 80 years. It was first established in 1939 as an emergency war hospital consisting of 20 Nissen huts built in 2 rows up a hill with a strip of land between them known as the ramp, which remained at the heart of the site until 2011. With the formation of the NHS in 1948, St Peter's Hospital came into existence and a new training school for nurses was opened, which by the 1960s was based in nearby Silverlands Mansion. In the early days there were no specialist services at St Peter's, but over the past 50 years the hospital has grown to become the modern, state-of-the-art facility it is today, caring for its community 24 hours a day, every day of the year. This film is part of a project working with the Healing Arts programme at Ashford and St Peter's Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust to record the testimonies of its staff past and present, and has been made possible thanks to a grant from the Association of Independent Museums and the National Lottery Heritage Fund.
Hospitals over the course of time have changed so much, both in terms of their environment and the professions which reside in our hospitals.
When I decided to go into nursing, I decided that I would follow in the footsteps of the generations before me. Because my gran was working in the Chertsey area, Mum automatically decided to do her training at St Peter's. So her St Peter's journey started in, I think she qualified in 1955.
And of course it was different in those days because it was a community in itself. They had their own gardeners, engineers. A lot of the services came over from Botley's that was tied in with St Peter's in those days. The kitchens over there used to cook the meals and they'd be sent over. A lot of the Botley's patients worked in St Peter's.
Well, it was great because we all trained together at St Peter's. There wasn't, and you didn't get moved. I mean, nowadays I think when they go to uni they get sent to St Peter's or Guildford or whatever their hospital that they get sent to, but they don't know each other because they all get sent to different places, whereas we all trained in the same place, all lived in close proximity.
St Peter's means a lot to the whole, local community because this has a lot of different departments, a lot of investigatory processes that they can do. And so this is, our first port of call after, maybe a GP investigations or something. I personally have had surgery here myself as well and had investigations. So I owe a lot to St Peter's and I'm really fond of it, which was why I wanted to take part in this documentary.
You had to be available. And of course in those days this was pre-mobile phones. You had a bleep on you, but if you left your house and the bleep went off, you had, in those days, it sounds bizarre now to young people, you had to find a phone box to phone the hospital from. It was very small. I mean, the work was quite intense, partly because if you have a rota of acute physicians, you have to cover a hospital, of course, for medicine 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So there had to be a consultant on call at home. So it was a 1 in 3 on call.
Fantastic clinical staff. I was really impressed with the clinical staff and the staff generally. I thought there was a really good spirit here. The hospital was an interesting mix of relatively old buildings and relatively new buildings. So it had obviously grown and developed as a district general hospital since it was first established as one of the emergency medical service hospitals just before the war.
Wards had to be rebuilt here to come back to St Peter's, and that's why we have modern-ish wards in one area in the hospital at St Peter's, because the Ashford wards were going to be run down and shut. So you had to have more capacity here.
That's very different to nowadays where you train in university. We trained in the hospital, so we had the first 8 weeks of learning about what we would be doing, because as junior nurses you were basically doing bed baths and bed pans.
So consultants moved over here. I moved over here around that time. and the emergency department shut, so Ashford gradually reduced its acute activity and forged a new identity, if you like.
Think back to when you did your training. If you had a bad day, let's say sister had shouted at you or thrown the keys at you, you would then get back to the accommodation in the evening, but we'd be sitting in each other's rooms chatting, having a bottle of wine. Yeah. Somebody would go and get a takeaway. One person who drove Marilyn had a car, would nip down into Chertsey and get a takeaway. But we supported one another.
And we had exams all the time, didn't we?
Yes.
You know, at the end of every block you had an exam and you had to pass the exam. But in those days everybody did seem to pass.
I have a whole family memory and whole family history of St Peter's, but I will be ever thankful for the time and experience that I've had here at St Peter's.
There's a load of them, loads of happy memories working here. It was a great place to work, and I enjoyed working. For all the pressures and strains and stresses that inevitably come with the job, I really enjoyed working here.
So I think being able to provide the history of a hospital through the stories of the people that have worked in it, through all of the periods of time, with all the changes that have happened, and for me, that modern piece of history around the global pandemic, it's been a real honour, and it's really lovely. It's going to be captured and kept in terms of hearing those stories and being able to be placed in the Chertsey Museum, which is fantastic, and I'm really grateful. So it's there for our local community forever. So I'm very grateful for that.